Zuri moved through the compound like a shadow, silent yet always watching. Her stepmother, Mama Kanda, barked orders from dawn to dusk, her voice sharp as a whip, while Zuri's two stepbrothers lounged about, eating the fruits of her labor. The villagers pitied her in whispers but never intervened. Mama Kanda had a tongue that could turn pity into shame. Each morning, before the first rooster crowed, Zuri fetched water from the well, swept the courtyard, and cooked breakfast for the family that barely acknowledged her presence. She rarely spoke, not because she was afraid, but because she understood that words were often wasted on people who refused to listen. Her silence was her strength. While others shouted, she observed. While her stepmother insulted her, Zuri memorized every tone, every lie, every shift in expression. It was through silence that she had learned how deceit and cruelty could dress themselves in respectability. Her eyes, large and deep like pools after rain, missed nothing. She noticed how her stepbrothers whispered together when their mother wasn't around. She caught how Mama Kanda's voice softened when certain visitors came to the door, especially the village chief's messenger. Zuri didn't know the full truth, but her instincts told her that darkness lingered behind the smiles in that house. Still, she remained obedient, careful, never giving her stepmother any reason to suspect the sharpness hidden behind her quiet demeanor. At night, when everyone else slept, she would sit by the dying fire, her hands resting on her knees, staring at the glowing embers as if they could speak. Sometimes she imagined her late mother's voice rising in the crackling flames, reminding her to be patient, to see, to listen, to endure. Her mother had once told her, "The ear that listens learns where the wind hides." Zuri carried those words like armor. The only place Zuri found peace was the small garden behind the compound, where her stepmother rarely went. She tended to the plants as if they were her children, whispering to them softly, her only words during the day. There she felt free, for even in her silence she could express her heart. She named every flower, every herb. The Mariula tree at the corner was her favorite. She would lean against it and close her eyes, dreaming of a life where her voice could be heard without punishment. Sometimes the village girls passed by, laughing, their voices light as wind. They pitied Zuri, thinking her quietness was a curse or a mark of weakness. None of them knew that Zuri's silence was deliberate, a cloak to hide her awareness, a way to protect what her stepmother could not destroy, her mind. Zuri's world was one of small movements and careful breaths. Each task she did was a rhythm of survival, each quiet glance a memory she tucked away. Though the world treated her like a servant, she carried within her the calm patience of a hunter, waiting for the right moment when silence could speak louder than any word ever could. The winds began to change in the village, carrying whispers heavier than rain clouds. It started with the children, one gone after another, always at night, always near the forest's edge. Then the cattle vanished, their tracks ending in strange circular marks burned into the earth. Hunters returned with stories of lights flickering between the trees, voices calling their names in tones that mimicked their loved ones. Fear crept into every hut, into every conversation spoken by firelight. The elders gathered beneath the great baobab, their faces carved with worry. "The forest spirits are restless," one said. "Someone has broken a covenant." Another spoke of ancient offerings forgotten, rituals left undone. The headman ordered every family to stay indoors after sunset, to keep fire burning through the night, for light was said to ward off the unseen. But not everyone trembled. Mama Kanda, Zuri's stepmother, seemed untouched by the panic. While others prayed, she hummed old songs as she stirred her stew, her eyes too calm, too certain. Her stepbrothers joked nervously that their mother feared nothing, not even the ancestors, but Zuri saw something else. A stillness too deliberate, the kind that comes from someone who already knows what everyone else is afraid to learn. At night, Zuri would hear her stepmother's voice murmuring in the dark, low and rhythmic, like someone reciting forgotten words. The sound would drift through the cracks of the walls, strange and unearthly. One night, she crept close enough to listen. Mama Kanda wasn't talking to herself. She was speaking to someone or something. A deep voice responded, not from any human throat, but from the shadows themselves. Zuri's breath caught in her chest, and she retreated silently, heart pounding. By day the village grew quieter. Mothers clutched their children tighter. Men returned from the forest empty-handed, their eyes haunted. Even the birds seemed to avoid flying too low. But Mama Kanda continued her life as if the world outside did not concern her. She spent more time locking certain baskets in her room, never letting Zuri near them. One afternoon, Zuri noticed a streak of ash on her stepmother's hands and a faint smell of burned herbs clinging to her clothes. The rumors deepened. Some said an old spirit had been awakened, one bound by human greed. Others whispered of a deal, a promise made generations ago. Zuri's mind turned to her stepmother's strange calmness, the locked baskets, the midnight murmurs. She began to piece together the signs, each small clue tightening the noose of dread around her heart. One evening, as thunder rolled in the distance, Zuri looked out from the kitchen hut and saw Mama Kanda standing by the forest's edge, her shawl fluttering like dark wings. She was not afraid of the storm or the forest, she was part of it. And for the first time, Zuri understood. Whatever curse was stirring in the darkness, it was not a stranger's doing. It had begun in her own house. That night, the moon hung low and swollen, bleeding pale light across the village rooftops. The storm that had been threatening for days finally broke in the distance, rumbling like a restless god. Zuri couldn't sleep. Her stepmother's voice carried again through the air, soft, urgent, and not alone. From her mat, Zuri rose silently and crept toward the window. The night smelled of wet earth and smoke. Beyond the compound, at the edge of the forest, figures moved, dark shapes lit by the flicker of a single lantern. She recognized her stepmother's posture instantly, the tilt of her head, the firmness of her hands. But the men with her were strangers, cloaked and tall. Zuri pressed her ear against the cracked wall, straining to catch their words. She heard fragments, the offering, one left, before the sun rises. Her stepmother's voice trembled slightly as she said, "The girl suspects nothing." Zuri's stomach tightened. The girl, that was her. She leaned closer, the damp clay cool against her cheek. One of the strangers shifted suddenly, and the light from the lantern fell across Zuri's face. Their eyes met for a brief, frozen second. The man's pupils were not human, they shimmered like oil. Zuri gasped and stumbled backward, but it was too late. "Someone listens," one of them hissed. Within minutes, the compound erupted with noise. Her stepmother's voice rose above the chaos, sharp and trembling with false fear. "Witch," she screamed. "The girl has cursed us. She listens to the spirits at night." The neighbors emerged, half-dressed and fearful, clutching charms and sticks. The strangers melted into the darkness as though they had never been there, leaving Zuri alone beneath the weight of the accusation. Zuri tried to speak, to defend herself, but her stepmother's tears drowned her words. "She brings bad luck," Mama Kanda wailed. "Since she came, our goats have died, the rains have faltered, and now she spies on sacred ground." Her stepbrothers, uncertain and afraid, joined in, nodding. "We've seen her wander at night," one lied, eyes darting away. "She whispers to herself." The crowd turned on Zuri, murmuring, some spitting, others stepping back as though her shadow might burn them. "Please," Zuri cried, her voice shaking. "I've done nothing." But the fear had already taken root, twisting truth into something unrecognizable. A man with a scarred arm, the headman's guard, grabbed her by the wrist. "We will lock her where no spirit can find her," he said. "If she's innocent, the dawn will prove it." Her stepmother nodded, her face a mask of grief. "Do it," she whispered. They dragged Zuri through the muddy path behind the house to the old clay room, a small circular structure that had been abandoned for years. The villagers said it was cursed, that a woman once died there calling out to unseen things. Its walls were cold, damp, and smelled of ashes and rot. The door creaked as they shoved her inside. Zuri fell to her knees, her hands scraping the rough floor. The door slammed shut behind her, the bolt sealing with a hollow clang that echoed through her bones. Darkness swallowed her whole. She could hear them walking away, their footsteps fading under the rain. Her stepmother's voice lingered for one last moment outside the door. "She will learn silence now," she said quietly. Then there was nothing, only the sound of the storm, the dripping roof, and Zuri's trembling breath as she realized the betrayal was complete. She was alone, locked in the room the villagers swore even ghosts refused to enter. The air in the clay room was thick and wet, heavy with the scent of earth and mildew. Zuri pressed her palms against the floor, feeling the cold seep into her skin. There was no light, not even a sliver of moonbeam to soften the darkness. Her breathing was the only sound until she heard it, the slow, rhythmic drip of water from the ceiling, hitting the ground like the ticking of a clock that counted only fear. At first she tried to steady herself. She whispered prayers her mother had once taught her, words meant to keep evil spirits at bay. But the silence that followed each prayer made her feel smaller, swallowed whole by the room. Her heartbeat sounded too loud, echoing in her ears. The walls seemed to close and the longer she sat, her chest tightening as though the air itself resented her for using it. She moved her hands along the wall, searching for a way out, but her fingers met only rough clay. Then something unexpected brushed back, a soft vibration beneath her palm. She froze, pressing closer. There it was again, faint but clear, a whisper. She thought it was the wind, but there were no windows for wind to pass through. The whispers came from the walls themselves. Zuri leaned in, her ear against the damp surface. The sound was fragmented, muffled, like several people speaking through layers of earth. "It isn't over," one voice said, low and hollow. "She will come again." Another murmured, "He watches through the cracks." Her pulse quickened. The voices were not clear enough to understand, yet every word sent chills crawling up her spine. She stumbled backward, clutching her arms around herself. "Who's there?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The room answered with a creak, a faint sigh that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then silence again, except for the steady drip from above. Minutes or maybe hours passed. Time no longer felt real in the dark. Her body began to tremble, her mind drifting between fear and exhaustion. She thought of her stepmother's calm face, her stepbrother's nervous eyes, the villagers who had turned away from her. The betrayal burned deeper than hunger or cold. Yet even in her despair, the whispers returned, this time clearer, more insistent. Zuri pressed her ear once more to the wall. The voices weren't random anymore. They were speaking to one another, as if gathered in a room beside hers. She could make out distinct tones, her stepmother's sharp cadence, the low hum of men's voices, and a strange rasping sound that didn't seem human. "The girl must not know," said one. "Her blood is what binds the pact." Another answered, "At the next moon it will be done." Her body went still. She wasn't just hearing echoes, she was listening to the living. There were chambers beyond this one, perhaps connected by old vents or hollow walls, and through them came secrets not meant for human ears. She sank to the ground, her hand trembling as she covered her mouth to muffle her breathing. The fear that had paralyzed her moments ago now sharpened into something else, awareness. The dark room wasn't only a prison. It was a window into the truth. Outside, the rain intensified, pounding the roof like warning drums. Inside, Zuri sat perfectly still, eyes wide though she could see nothing. The voices had quieted, but their words hung in the air, heavy, poisonous, and unforgettable. Somewhere in that silence, she realized, the darkness wasn't just keeping her in, it was keeping their secrets from getting out. At first, Zuri thought the voices that slithered through the cracks were the murmurs of spirits, restless souls trapped within the clay just like her. Their tones drifted between sorrow and rage, whispering things that made her skin prickle. She pressed her hands over her ears and rocked back and forth, praying under her breath. But no prayer silenced them. The whispers grew sharper, more distinct, words threading together like woven cloth. That was when she realized the truth. These weren't spirits at all. The voices belonged to the living. She held her breath, moving closer to the wall. Through a narrow slit in the clay, she could hear every word as if the air itself wanted her to listen. Her stepmother's voice came first, calm and commanding. "The villagers grow restless," she said. "They suspect something but they do not know where to look." Another voice, one of the strangers Zuri had seen near the forest, answered, his tone deep and cruel. "Then the next offering must be greater. The spirits demand more, power has a cost." Zuri's heart hammered so hard she feared they might hear it. "And the missing children?" another man asked. "People will start counting." "They were chosen," her stepmother said coldly. "Those who vanish feed the pact. Their blood binds the fortune of this house." Zuri's breath caught in her throat. The rumors that had haunted the village, the disappearances, the strange lights, the sense of being watched, were all connected to her stepmother. The woman she had trusted, served, and feared was the source of it all. The truth pressed down on Zuri like a weight she could barely hold. The men laughed quietly, the sound low and greedy. One of them jingled coins, the metallic ring echoing through the thin walls. "So the wealth continues," he said. "The crops will flourish, the cattle will multiply, and the elders will praise the spirits for their blessings. And they will never know the price," her stepmother replied. There was silence for a moment, the kind that buzzes louder than noise. Then came a strange sound, the scraping of something heavy being dragged across the floor. Zuri's heart froze as her stepmother said, "The next full moon comes soon. The girl's blood will be enough to seal the covenant again." The girl. Zuri. Her stomach twisted. Her stepmother hadn't just betrayed her to silence her, she had locked her here as a sacrifice. Her entire life had been part of something darker than cruelty or jealousy. The woman had sold her soul for power and wealth, and now she was ready to sell Zuri's life to keep it. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't make a sound. The shadows shifted in the room, and the dripping from the ceiling fell in rhythm with her heartbeat. She pressed her fingers against the wall, trembling not from fear anymore, but from the cold clarity of realization. They had stolen everything from her, her freedom, her safety, her family. But they had made one mistake. They had locked her in the one place where their secrets couldn't hide. And through the whispers of their own voices, they had given her the truth that could destroy them all. Night after night, Zuri pressed her ear to the cracked clay wall, piecing together fragments of words, whispers, and half-spoken threats. At first, she had thought the stories of spirits in the forest were merely tales to scare children, but now she understood the truth was far darker. Every secret she overheard stitched together into a pattern, a tapestry of fear and greed that stretched across the village like a shadow that refused to fade. Her stepmother's voice, calm yet commanding, recited instructions to the strangers. The offerings must continue. Each child is a seed, each drop of blood a promise. Only then will the pact hold and power remain within our reach. The strangers replied with low murmurs, their tones dripping with satisfaction, as if the lives of others were mere currency. Zuri shivered at the realization. The missing children were not victims of chance or misfortune. They were sacrifices, offered willingly to shadowy entities that existed beyond the comprehension of ordinary men. The pieces fell into place. The lights flickering in the forest were not spirits lost but a signal, a mark of their unholy activity. The cattle that vanished were offerings to secure prosperity, and the strange patterns burned into the ground were symbols of binding, meant to keep the spirits satisfied and the pact unbroken. Even the elders' warnings now seemed tainted with truth. Some of them may have suspected, but fear of the pact had silenced them, leaving only murmurs in the dark. Zuri's stepbrothers were not innocent bystanders. They too had pledged themselves to the covenant. Their teasing, their laughter, and their occasional cruelty were all calculated, a performance to keep Zuri submissive and unaware. She realized with a sinking heart that her imprisonment was not punishment for disobedience but preparation for something far worse. The dark room she now called home was meant to be her grave, a place where she could neither run nor speak. Yet even as the truth settled over her like a suffocating blanket, Zuri's mind sharpened. She catalogued every word, every tone, every hint of weakness in the voices beyond the wall. The strangers, though fearsome, were not infallible. Their confidence, so evident in the rustle of their clothing and the clink of coins, betrayed arrogance. Zuri's stepmother, for all her cunning, revealed herself in her constant need to command, to guide, to ensure no detail was forgotten. The pact had made them powerful, yes, but it had not made them untouchable. Each night, Zuri drew strength from the whispers. She began to imagine escape, to envision how the knowledge she gained might be turned against those who had plotted her death. The shadow spirits, she realized, were bound by rules just as humans were. They required offerings, incantations, and obedience. If she could understand the structure of their power, perhaps she could find a way to disrupt it. But fear never fully left her. She often lay awake, listening to the final words of the conversations, imagining the fates of the children, wondering if she too would become one of the nameless, faceless victims meant to secure riches and influence for those she had once called family. By the end of each night, Zuri's mind was a battlefield of terror and resolve. She had uncovered the horrifying truth. Her stepmother and stepbrothers had bartered morality for wealth, life for prosperity, and her silence was the final requirement. But in that very silence she discovered her greatest weapon, the knowledge that could destroy the unholy pact forever. Late one night, as Zuri lay curled against the cold clay wall, a new sound reached her ears, faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakably human. It was a soft, trembling cry, like the voice of a child lost in a storm. She froze, heart hammering, straining to pinpoint its source. The sound seemed to come from beneath the floor itself, vibrating through the damp earth like a secret pulse. Fear and curiosity warred within her. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks, conjuring noises from the shadows. But the crying persisted, steady and sorrowful, rising and falling with an almost rhythmic cadence. She pressed her palms to the rough floor, feeling its vibrations through her fingertips. It was real. Something, or someone, was trapped beneath the house, and the sound called to her in a way that stirred both terror and compassion. Driven by instinct she barely understood, Zuri began to dig. Her fingers clawed at the soft clay and loose earth, scraping and pulling as nails broke and palms bled. The cries grew louder, clearer, as if encouraging her, as though the very children who had vanished were guiding her hands. She dug deeper, her arms aching, the room spinning around her, but she refused to stop. Every handful of dirt uncovered was a promise to the unseen souls beneath. After what felt like hours, her fingers brushed against something hard. She uncovered fragments of small bones, delicate and broken, some barely larger than her little finger. Beside them were shattered charms, beads, carved bones, pieces of cloth, remnants of rituals she could barely comprehend. The smell of decay was sharp in her nostrils, but Zuri did not recoil. She whispered a prayer for the lost children, promising them that their suffering would not be forgotten. Then, as if in response, the whispers began. They were not the voices of the living this time, but the spirits themselves. They rose from the earth in murmurs of sorrow and urgency. "Survive, survive, tell them what was done," they chanted, weaving through the clay and filling the dark room with an energy that prickled Zuri's skin. Their presence was both comforting and terrifying, a reminder that life and death could coexist in the narrow spaces of the world. Zuri pressed her forehead to the cold floor, tears mingling with dirt on her cheeks. She felt the spirits' hands brush against her in gentle reassurance, their murmurs coiling into her mind like threads of courage. They gave her strength, a sense of purpose that rose above the fear clutching her heart. The same room that had been a prison now felt like a conduit, a bridge between her and the truths hidden by her stepmother and the strangers. By the time she finally straightened, the whispers faded, leaving only a lingering hum in the clay walls. Zuri's hands were raw, her body exhausted, but her resolve was unshakable. She had seen the evidence of their crimes. She had touched the bones of the children who had been stolen from the village. And she understood, with a clarity that burned in her veins, she could not remain silent. She had to survive. She had to expose the truth. The room that had once been her cage was now the place where her courage was forged. And beneath the floor, the spirits of the lost children waited, their voices a promise and a warning, urging her onward into the darkness beyond. Zuri's fingers trembled as she traced the cracks in the clay wall, feeling the brittle edges give way beneath her touch. The old room had been built years ago, its walls weakened by time, rain, and neglect. She pressed herself against it, listening to the faint creak as the clay shifted, testing its strength. Every heartbeat pounded like a drum of warning, but the cries and whispers beneath the floor had given her purpose, and purpose had lent her courage. With a deep, shuddering breath, she began to push and dig at the narrowest crack. Her nails tore at the brittle clay, and small chunks crumbled to the floor. The rough edges scraped her hands until they bled, streaking dirt and dried clay over her skin. The darkness pressed against her, heavy and suffocating, but she focused only on the weak point in the wall, imagining freedom just beyond it. Hours, or maybe minutes, time was meaningless, passed in that struggle. Finally, with a muffled snap, the wall gave way just enough for her to squeeze through. Zuri fell onto the damp earth outside the room, coughing as the fresh night air filled her lungs. She was covered in dirt and blood, her clothes torn, but she was free. The forest beyond was alive with strange, flickering lights. At first she thought it was fireflies, but as she looked closer she saw the faint, glowing forms of children rising above the forest floor. They didn't speak, yet Zuri could feel their presence, gentle and insistent, guiding her. Their tiny, luminous forms moved between the trees, and instinctively she followed, stepping over roots and fallen branches, listening to their silent call. Branches scratched her face and arms, but Zuri didn't care. Every step was a step away from the house that had imprisoned her, a step toward life, toward truth. The whispers she had overheard nights ago swirled in her mind, repeating names, dates, and rituals. She knew she must carry this knowledge beyond the forest, to warn others and ensure the justice the children deserved. Her legs ached, her body was raw, but the spirit seemed to lift her forward, giving her strength she did not know she possessed. At one point she stumbled into a shallow creek, water lapping over her bruised feet. She paused only long enough to catch her breath, listening to the hum of the glowing forms. They twirled around her, their light illuminating the path ahead, like torches held by invisible hands. By the time dawn broke, casting a pale light over the trees, Zuri had reached the edge of the forest. She stopped and looked back at the dark silhouette of her home, shivering in fear and determination. Her stepmother's house lay in ruin in her mind, a symbol of betrayal, greed, and darkness that she would not forget. Zuri knelt on the forest floor, pressing her palms together, whispering a vow into the wind. She would survive. She would return. And she would expose every secret she had overheard, every crime committed against the children and the village. The spirits of the lost, glowing faintly around her, seemed to nod in approval. Freedom was not just escape, it was the beginning of her mission, the start of a reckoning that would shake the village to its core. Night had fallen over the village like a thick, suffocating blanket when Zuri returned, her face streaked with dirt, her hair tangled and wild. She moved silently, wrapped in a tattered cloak she had scavenged from the forest floor, her eyes sharp and calculating. The familiar paths, once oppressive and confining, now felt like allies. Every shadow, every whisper of wind through the huts, seemed to guide her steps. She had learned patience and she had learned cunning. Tonight she would reclaim her voice. She slipped into the compound where her stepmother's house stood, the same place that had been her prison. Every creak of the floorboards, every swaying reed of the roof, was an old memory she now used to her advantage. She crouched behind the corner of the main hall, her heart pounding, listening. The air smelled faintly of herbs, smoke, and the same burnt offerings she had once smelled through the clay walls. Her stepmother appeared, draped in ceremonial cloth, murmuring incantations under her breath. Strange symbols were drawn in chalk on the floor, and candles flickered in the dim light, casting eerie shadows that danced along the walls. The strangers from before stood at her side, their faces hidden beneath dark hoods, hands raised in silent gestures. Zuri held her breath, feeling the cold bite of fear and the hotter burn of determination. Then, from the spaces she had once crawled through in the dark room, a sound rose, a wailing, keening cry that made the air itself tremble. The spirits of the lost children had returned, responding to her presence, their energy amplified by the knowledge she carried. The cries were not just sorrow, they were rage, and their volume shook the compound. Candles flickered wildly, some extinguished by sudden gusts, while shadows twisted unnaturally, creeping along the walls like living things. The villagers, drawn by the noise, gathered outside the house, clutching sticks and charms, their eyes wide with terror. They saw the light and the shifting shapes inside and whispered of spirits awakened, of curses and vengeance. Fear spread faster than fire, and Mama Kanda's calm facade began to crumble. Zuri remained hidden, observing everything. She watched as her stepmother's voice wavered, the incantations faltering. The strangers' gestures grew frantic, as if their control over the spirits had been broken. Each shout from the crowd outside made the house's shadows writhe in response. Zuri realized that the balance of power had shifted. The very spirits that had once demanded silence were now on her side. She saw her chance. Moving like a shadow, she slipped from her hiding place, letting the glow of the candles and the wails of the spirits shield her presence. Her hands trembled, but her resolve was unshakable. The ritual faltered further, the floor cracking under the force of unseen energy, and Mama Kanda's face twisted in panic. The villagers cried out, running back in fear and awe, while Zuri finally stepped into the center of the chaos. The spirits' cries echoed around her, mingling with the wind and the distant rumble of thunder. She no longer felt like a powerless girl locked in a clay room. She was the witness, the survivor, and the harbinger of justice. The night of reckoning had arrived, and with it, the secrets that could destroy them all would finally be revealed. Zuri stepped from the shadows, her cloak falling away to reveal the girl who had once been silenced. The villagers froze, eyes wide, unsure if the figure before them was flesh or spirit. The wind howled through the trees, carrying with it the faint whispers of the lost children, now amplified into a chorus that seemed to fill the night sky. Zuri's voice, steady and clear, cut through the chaos. "I know what you have done," she began, her gaze fixed on her stepmother. "I have heard every word. I have seen every act. You sold our children to the darkness. You performed rituals to steal wealth, to bind spirits, and you did it all while pretending to love us. You thought no one could see, no one could hear, but I did." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The villagers, who had once turned a blind eye to the strange happenings, now felt the weight of the truth pressing down upon them. Zuri repeated the words she had memorized night after night, every detail of the unholy pact, every sacrifice, every stolen coin and missing child. The names of the lost whispered through her mouth like a prayer for justice. Her stepmother's face turned pale, the carefully maintained composure cracking as the spirit's energy swirled around the compound. The candles flickered and sputtered in the gusting wind, shadows twisting unnaturally across the walls. Her stepbrothers tried to step forward, to deny, to hide, but their words were drowned out by the rising chorus of the lost. The spirits' wails formed a storm, gusting through the trees, shaking the house, rattling the earth beneath the villagers' feet. "Confess," Zuri demanded, her voice now ringing with authority. "Tell the elders what you have done." Mama Kanda fell to her knees, the words finally breaking free. "It is true," she cried. "I sought power through the spirits. I used the children, the sacrifices. Everything you have heard is true. I did it for wealth, for influence, for life beyond what I could earn honestly. I am sorry. Her stepbrothers, trembling, followed suit, admitting their complicity. They described the rituals, the offerings, the pacts, every detail Zuri had pieced together from the walls and whispers. The elders, wide-eyed and solemn, recorded every confession, their faces etched with grief and anger. The villagers murmured among themselves, some weeping, some shaking their fists, all overwhelmed by the magnitude of the betrayal. Outside, the storm of spirits intensified, wind whipping through the village, fire igniting from the candles into spectral flames that danced without consuming. The children's voices rose in unison, a haunting chorus of sorrow and justice, as if the air itself demanded that the crimes be acknowledged. Zuri felt the energy surround her, not threatening but empowering, filling her with clarity and purpose. By the time the night had reached its peak, the truth was laid bare. Every secret, every stolen life, every act of greed and cruelty was revealed before the village. The unholy pact was broken by exposure, and the spirits, no longer bound, howled their sorrow and relief. Zuri, standing amidst the storm, felt the weight of her ordeal lift slightly. She had been silenced, imprisoned, and betrayed, yet she had returned not as a victim but as a harbinger of truth. The villagers would never forget what they had learned tonight, and the dark secrets of her stepmother and brothers would never again go unpunished. By dawn, the village was alive with a tense, trembling energy. The night's revelations had left everyone shaken, their fear now mingled with righteous fury. Zuri stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as the villagers, once timid, now emboldened, moved toward the stepmother's house. The wind carried the faint glow of residual spirits, their cries fading but still lingering, urging justice. The first to act were the elders, clutching ceremonial staffs and chanting blessings to shield the villagers from lingering curses. Men and women grabbed torches and tools, ready to dismantle the symbols of cruelty and greed that had haunted them. Zuri felt the pulse of the freed spirits around her, a steady, guiding rhythm, as if they were lending their strength to the living. The villagers stormed the house, breaking doors and windows with a unified determination that seemed almost supernatural. Every idol, every charm, every painted symbol that her stepmother had used to bind the spirits was smashed under heavy stones and hammers. Clay figures shattered, wood splintered, and ashes swirled in the morning air. Each act of destruction sent a tremor through the remaining darkness, like a chain snapping after centuries of restraint. Zuri stepped forward as the flames began to lick the edges of the house. She watched the fire consume the place where she had been imprisoned, the site of her suffering and her revelation. The smoke spiraled skyward, carrying with it the sorrow of the children and the betrayal of her family, but also the promise of liberation. The cries she had once heard beneath the floor faded, replaced by a still, healing silence. The spirits had returned to peace. Villagers looked to Zuri, awe and gratitude mingling in their eyes. The girl they had once shunned, the one they had feared for her quietness and perceived strangeness, now stood as the embodiment of courage and truth. The elders whispered among themselves, nodding solemnly. "She has brought balance," one said. "She has freed the lost and shown us the path to justice." Zuri felt the weight of her ordeal settle into something lighter, like a mantle she could wear without it crushing her. She approached the remaining children in the village, those who had been kept safe but had feared for their friends, and spoke softly, offering guidance and comfort. "You are safe now," she told them. "The darkness cannot touch us anymore." As the village cleaned and rebuilt, Zuri's reputation transformed. She became a protector not only of the innocent but also of the truth itself. Villagers brought their problems and secrets to her counsel, knowing she could see through deception and fear. Mothers whispered to their daughters, teaching them courage, while fathers nodded to their sons, reminding them that strength without wisdom is hollow. Even the forest seemed to shift, lighter somehow, as if the trees themselves exhaled relief. Zuri walked among her people, no longer silent, no longer invisible. The night of shadows had passed and a new era had begun, one in which the whispers of the innocent guided the village's hearts and actions. The girl who had once been locked away had become their voice, their shield, and their hope, ensuring that no secret of darkness would again go unchallenged. Years later, long after the fires had burned out and the clay walls of her prison had crumbled into memory, Zuri's story became woven into the very fabric of the village. Mothers told their daughters about the girl who had once been locked away in darkness, who had listened while others schemed and plotted in secret. They spoke of her courage, her patience, and the way her silence had concealed a mind sharp enough to unravel the lies of the wicked. Children listened wide-eyed, imagining the cold clay room, the dripping water, and the faint whispers that had carried the truth to Zuri. They shivered at the thought of the shadow she had endured, yet their fear was tempered by awe. "Remember her," mothers would say, their voices steady and grave, "for even when we cannot see, the innocent may witness what the wicked hope will remain hidden." Her story became both warning and promise. It reminded the villagers that deceit and cruelty, no matter how carefully hidden, could never survive against eyes and ears willing to see and hear. It taught them that silence was not always weakness. Sometimes it was strategy, preparation, and the quiet strength that precedes justice. Zuri had been underestimated, dismissed, and oppressed, yet she had returned, a force that reshaped her world and freed the souls who had been lost. When the wind blew through the trees of the surrounding forest, villagers swore they could hear a faint whisper, a murmur of her name carried across the leaves and branches. Zuri, it breathed, soft yet resolute, echoing through the generations as if the spirits themselves sang her legacy. Travelers passing near the village would feel the sudden chill, hear the faint voice in the rustling leaves, and wonder at the story that had outlived its telling. Her name became a symbol of courage, vigilance, and the power of truth. Songs were sung, stories retold, and rituals performed not to summon spirits but to honor the girl who had faced them, who had uncovered the darkness, and who had taught the village that the smallest, quietest voice could carry the weight of justice. Even centuries later, when new generations played in the forest and the wind stirred the leaves, a shiver of recognition would pass through them. Somewhere beyond the shadows, Zuri's presence lingered, not as a ghost to fear but as a guiding force. Her story, whispered from mother to daughter, from elder to child, endured as a testament to the truth. The silence of the innocent can thunder louder than the lies of the wicked, and courage, even in darkness, leaves a mark that time cannot erase.